We'll see. Okay, so we are talking about equity stroke equality, diversity, inclusion and race, and how to talk about those things in your studio, in how you talk about your work, in your life generally. So the first thing we're going to do is just watch this very little thing about equity versus equality, because it's kind of something that lots of people don't feel that they understand, and she puts it a lot better than I do. So here we go. Yes. Here we go, I say. Come on. Go. Ah! No, that's not what I wanted to do, sorry. Okay.
Before we can talk about equity versus equality, I want to first define diversity. At Inclusive Communities, we like to say diversity in its simplest definition means differences. We all have differences, from our glasses to our weight to how much money we have. That is diversity, and no matter how much people say it's hard to find diversity, that's not true. Diversity exists. It's about taking the time to acknowledge its existence and work to ensure action is taken to embrace these differences, not alienate them. Equality is often equated to fairness and sameness, and is based in the misconception that we all have the same needs and the same solution will work for everyone. Equity is based in access and opportunity, with the understanding that we each start with different advantages and disadvantages, and thus have different needs to attain access and opportunity. To understand equity, we have to compare it to equality. Now, I love this equity versus equality graphic, as it's the best explanation of the difference between the two. On the equality side, you see that we've got three individuals, our tall guy, our short girl, and our friend in the wheelchair. And you see that they're all trying to watch this baseball game, but there's this fence. With equality, they've each been given a box to use to be able to see the game. But obviously that's not working, because our tall friend is now super tall and sees very clearly over the fence, while our short girl can just barely see it. She's still kind of on her tiptoes and struggling to see the game, while the person in the wheelchair can't see it all and they can't even get on the box. On the equity side of this picture, you can see that now we've given each individual exactly what they need to be able to see the game. The person in the wheelchair has a ramp, so they can clearly get to the top and see the full game. The shorter girl has two boxes, which is what she needed to comfortably be able to see, and the tall person has no boxes at all because they didn't need the extra assistance in the first place. Equity is a process, which means it is continuous. We can't gain equity by changing just one thing. For example, the equity side of this photo shows our friend in the wheelchair has gained equity at this fence, but the work is not done. True progressive equity is about how can we ensure that he has equitable opportunities at all of the hypothetical and real fences in his life. Equity requires power, resources, and social responsibility to work hand in hand to change the structures and provide opportunities to those who were institutionally left out, marginalized, or oppressed. Equity is hard, but it's essential for us to make change in the lives of those who have been historically depicted as less than. From individuals with disabilities like physical, developmental, and mental, to people living in poverty without access to food or education or healthcare. It's important for us to understand that there is a long history of discrimination, which has created the present day inequities which don't allow these individuals the same access to opportunity than those who don't have those differences. One of the greatest gifts that we give to students that we work with is the opportunity to share their story and to find value in their voice. And this increases awareness and a sense of empowerment. Everyone has their own stuff. Everyone is going through something that challenges their emotional and physical capacity to be great. But but there is power in connection. So now here's your challenge. Be brave and seek out those opportunities to have authentic conversations with those that are different than you. Find out what makes them unique and what brings them joy. Then you do the same. Share your story, because you have value as well. Now you've built community. And with community, we have power. We is always stronger than me.
I don't know who the harbour is. Thoughts? Questions? I mean, it's still very American to use equity instead of equality. And the idea that we use equality would be equal, like the longer version of that word is about equal access to everything. So the idea is the same, like equality doesn't mean make everyone's lessons the same price or give everyone the same support. But that's how it's starting to be more understood, is like if it's kind of there's a shortcut, like if you are giving equal opportunities, it's like a tick box exercise. You can say that you are you're not discriminating against anyone, that's true. You're not making it more difficult for anyone, that's true. But you're not making it easier for the people whose lives make it more difficult for them to access whatever it is you're offering. So here, Suzuki lessons. So equity is kind of becoming more the usual term, but I think we're all on the same page that we mean, when we say, like, if I say I work in equality, diversity and inclusion, I'm not talking about giving everyone the same box. We are talking about trying to equal out how people access things so that somebody who has barriers has them removed and someone who doesn't have barriers, doesn't need to benefit from the same things.
Yeah, and then put up to prevent them from getting anything. I think in this day and age people see or can see equality rather than equity. They tend to have a fine grasp of that concept, and a lot of people perceive it that they lose something so that somebody else can get something, and that's really unfortunate. I think we have to be careful when we explain to our families that actually it's levelling out rather than you're getting something that, or somebody else is getting something that's denied to you.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing that we have that conversation around is with benefits, like state benefits. And I think the thing is about that is if you imagine a situation where you've got a wealthy person and a deprived person or a low income person, then you've got two ways to look at that. Either you earn whatever you earn and you pay whatever amount of tax or whatever, and you shouldn't, the wealthy person may feel, I shouldn't have to pay more than anyone else in order to support the person who's got a low income because they should be self-supporting. But the other option to look at it is, particularly with someone who's on a low income rather than living on benefits entirely, which is kind of a separate conversation, well, the proportion of your income, like if you're earning 500,000 a year, the proportion of your income that you're paying to live is going to be much, much lower than someone who's earning £20,000 a year, because you may live in a house that's more expensive, but you're not going to live in a house that's 50 times more expensive. You pay a higher rate of tax, but it's not, like if you think about the amount of money that you need just to survive in London, for example, pretty much that 20 grand is going to go on food, transport, bills and rent or mortgage. And the 500,000, still, that person it only costs them 20,000 of what they actually need to live, and then they choose how far they want to top it up. So then proportionally you are paying much less than someone who's poor to have the same lifestyle or to have the same basic access to
Shelter and food.
basics. And I think, for us at Suzuki Hub, and if you, in your private practices, if you ever have one, choose to set up a similar thing, our wealthier families do pay more than they would if we ran a business model where we need to make X amount per year, we have this many families per year, that means it costs £50 a month. Yeah, they do pay more because we want to offer bursaries. We don't have a magic pot of money anywhere. You know, we get bursaries, private lesson bursaries from the LSG, but our in-house group bursaries have to come from somewhere. We don't get grants or whatever. And so the way that I've explained that to parents, mostly they just totally get it and they're delighted that A, they can afford to be in the full price paying bracket, and B, that they're helping other people. But the way that I've described it is like, okay, well, let's say it's £70 a month. If your family income is 6,000 or 7,000 a month, that's 1% of your income going to Suzuki. If your income is 700 a month, it's 10%. So it's not that you're paying more, like, yes, you are paying more in terms of the actual amount that you pay, but the percentage-wise, someone who's on a low income is still paying a much bigger percentage of their income to come here and access it, and we are doing the best that we can to make that more accessible by reducing that percentage. And yes, that means that your monthly amount goes up a bit, but the percentage is still way lower for you. Does that make sense as a different way to think about it?
I've got a slight, I think in London especially, or in the UK now, but income-based, if there are people with a low family income for whatever reasons who are owning houses, and I think that's we have to be careful that the actual, it's not like a monthly thing, it's like, it's the overall needs. Are the overall needs, like how much?
It's about your incomings and your outgoings,
but also your assets. That's what I mean. Some people are sitting in a house but not making any money, maybe because the parents are stay at home, or one of the parents is stay at home for a bit. I think that's the thing with. I don't know if it's across the board with the Suzuki.
But what you're saying is, if your house is worth £1 million, you should sell it and not take any money from us.
School, the free school meals thing
doesn't exist anymore.
Okay, when it did then, it's if the parents had less than £16,000 as their assets and they had a low income, then they would qualify for free school meals. Yeah, because I think there are quite privileged families who can access our bursaries, who actually, if they're called up granny, they could probably get the money through that. There is definitely a lot more family money there.
But I mean, I totally agree with what you say, and I find it like, this is conversations that we have I sit on the London Suzuki Group Bursary Committee, and I've done for 22 years. We have these conversations a lot, but what it comes down to then is like, so if you're a low income, well, there's all sorts of like ethical issues about what judgment you make. Like, is someone low income because they are choosing not to work longer hours, or are they already working long hours and they aren't qualified to do anything more? If you're a stay-at-home parent because you're completely convinced that your child will grow up to be a healthier human being because they've got a parent who stays at home with them until they're 3, is that a choice that we can judge as being like, well, then you don't get our money from the LSG because you could go out and get a job and put your kid in childcare? All of these things are like, we're not going to talk about them now because that's not what this session is about. But those kind of thorny ethical issues, like if your entire life is in London, and let's say you've got 2 kids, you own a 2-bedroom house in Hackney, parts of Hackney that's going to be close to £1 million. You can't remortgage because your income isn't high enough to extend your mortgage any further. Is your moral position that person, that family, should move out of London to a cheaper place, or out of Hackney to a cheaper place because they've got that asset? Or is it like, it's a very weird place to be in London where you can be a millionaire on paper and earn 25 grand a year income, and because that house you can only swap for something the same, I don't think we should have that conversation now, because we can go, oh no, we can do it in the pub sometime. But I do think that those issues are really thorny.
I found, because obviously also seeing people on Zoom, you saw doing some peripatetic teaching, you see into people's homes, and it just doesn't necessarily equate to like their bursary status at all.
But that could be a snapshot of their home as and when they used to earn, and then maybe their circumstances changed as well. It is tricky, because I remember some people talking, because I lived in the council flat till not that long ago, and I had a flat screen TV because I bought that when I was working. But when somebody said, "Oh, you live in a council house," I said, "Yeah, you got a flat screen TV," and I said, "Yeah." So, "Well, we shouldn't be living in a council house." I was like, "Hold on,
Yeah.
hold on. How do you know how I got that? It could have been £4 a week on, you know."
Yeah, and some
Yeah,
people
well,
bought a house 15 years ago when it was an absolute wreck and spent
Yeah.
5 years doing it up, and now it looks beautiful. And other people, you know, like I see it all the time in like the cars that families have to pick up their children in this school, which is a really, really deprived school, and a school around the corner from me similar. And there are all of these massive 4x4s, and it's like, but that's a status symbol that a lot of people who are living in small places, they can't afford to buy a bigger place, maybe council tenants, maybe working as security guards, or, you know, like pretty low income, the car becomes like the status symbol that that's not you, that you get to drive around the streets in and people look at you and think you're rich. And if that is important to you, it's an affordable way. Like, you know, to go back to the percentage thing, they will be spending a much higher percentage of their income just on having that car than most of us would consider to be sensible. But it's
like trainers.
Yeah. Second hand. Right, we're going to move on. So that's the equity, equality kind of thing, and there is another one which I will send a link to if you want to watch more. There's various things I can send you.
In practice, how do you bring it into the equity, equality into your teaching?
So I would say it's not really about my teaching, it's about the management of Suzuki Hub. So things like, yeah, we have some families who are on a bursary from the London Suzuki Group and on a bursary from us, and therefore they're paying maybe, I mean, we don't have anyone on really low group rate anymore because it was historical, but no, that's not true. Like, maybe end up paying £6 a week for their entire Suzuki experience for half an hour or 45 minutes group. Private lesson, plus music, mind games, orchestra, plus group. And yeah, that, you know, if you just took our budget, if we were only concerned with having middle class families, and we didn't have to build in an in-house bursary system, our group lessons would be cheaper, like quite a lot cheaper. But that's not what I'm interested in, as you know. Yeah, so I think in terms of like, there are sort of two things I want to talk about now. One of them is just what language we can use around diversity and inclusion particularly, and then the equality, equity thing, and how you might actually think about putting that into your private practice. Obviously, if you work here, then your fees are set, the way that you get charged are set, and the offers that we have for the students are set. So that's kind of part of being a big organisation like this. But if you're like planning to set up a programme at home, or you have one day a week where you're teaching from your house or you're moving around, you know, I think that lots of people are now thinking and not doing yet. I think there's quite a big discussion about introducing a sliding scale of lesson rates. And so, for example, you know, if you haven't like had a big program yet, maybe you've taught a couple of students, or maybe you've never taught before, you might think, okay, everyone's telling me I could charge £40 an hour as an emerging teacher, like for my first. Oh, sorry, I thought I'd turned it off. Oh God, someone needs to come and fix our printer. But I don't think that is them. Oh, I have turned it. Why are you ringing it? It's on Do Not Disturb. Oh, okay. Sorry. So quite a lot of people are now thinking, instead of charging that £40 to everyone, and if someone says I can only afford 20 or 35 or 5, then you just say, sorry, that's all I've got, 40 or nothing. That you might say, okay, I'm going to make it 55 for high income, like wherever you choose to draw that, like, you know, for me, a family income of 100 grand, even in London, is a lot of money, like. But you know, for the Hackney Proms, which I also run, we had a lengthy discussion in our trustees meeting the other day, because we are experimenting with sliding scale of tickets, and we put family income 50,000 or more is £13 a ticket, so like full regular price, and then between 25 and 50,000 income is 9, and then under 25,000 is 5, and that's family income. And we had a really lengthy discussion about how the fact that like having kids makes such a difference. Like if you're an individual living on 50 grand, then you're pretty, you know, that's going pretty well for you, even in London. If you are 2 parents and 3 children, 50 grand, you're going to feel really broke. And so like, how do you allow, it's like the equity equality thing, isn't it? It's like, how do you, so next time, we've got a concert this Sunday, so we're not changing anything for that, but next time we're going to have a single parent family rate and a family rate, and make it family tickets, and then change the boundaries for the like single tickets. But you know, so you might say, okay, 100 grand or more, you pay 65, and you would say to the 55 or whatever you want to charge, you might say to the families, you know, I charge on a sliding scale, here are my rates, you can see them on my phone, on the website, on a piece of paper, whatever. You can see that I'm offering £5 an hour lessons for people earning less than 20,000, which is essentially benefits. Like if you're earning less than £20,000, you're either working part-time and receiving some benefits, or you're living exclusively on benefits. So, you know, I'm making it really accessible for them, and that's why yours is so expensive, even though I'm a new teacher. And you can experiment with that and see how many people say, no thanks, we'll go and get the £40 an hour guy down the road, and how many of them are like, oh yeah, that's interesting. You know, there's no, I can't give you any stats. I don't think there's any qualitative research on this. Quantitative research.
I've got a little comparative stat thing from the Burns Night Ceilidh, charity Ceilidh we did. So the first year we did a fixed price ticket, which was £50, was expensive for them. Yeah. The second year we did a Feeling Generous 75, the standard ticket 50, concessions at 20, and then
this is raising money for charity, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then a donation lot, and it equaled out to £49 something per ticket. So it was like it kind of just leveled out.
I think that really often happens. Like, yeah, I've run the Halloween festival for years and years and years, and we've always had a really low rate for people on low incomes, and I've never asked for proof. I've always given a guide. Like now it's under 25,000. It used to be under 15,000 when I first started it. So it was like, so you don't check many years ago. No, I didn't check, and we've never had. I was always like, you have to apply because I need to be able to like cap the numbers if we have loads of people. We've always just been able to make money from saying yes to everyone, basically. And it's really interesting that, because lots of people are like, you know, worried about. So this is another thing with the problems that we're considering. Like, we could just say, pay what you think, and give some guide, like going to the Barbican will cost you this much, going to, you know, your local library will cost you this much, going to blah blah, and like give people just a little snapshot of the research that we've done and see what happens. But the thing about all of these conversations is that you need to be financially secure enough, either as an individual or as an organisation, to take the hit if you get it wrong. So, you know, with the things, like you may have come out going, oh, we only made £25 a head. That's still like great to raise money for charity, but if you've got huge costs and then you end up in debt because you didn't make enough money to you know, pay your £1,400 musician bill, for example, then it's very different. So it's like all of those kind of like a bit like we were talking about before about, you know, how many students to get, how many hours to work, what to charge, all of that is just balancing out all of the different things of what you can afford, what you need to make, you know, where you feel the benefits are going to come. Like, I think that one of the things that I struggle with on the Suzuki bursary front is that often within the LSG, there's two things that make me uncomfortable. Often it's an entirely white studio, and then a person who's got the bursary will be like the representative of ethnic minorities, and I'm like, just, it's uncomfortable in all sorts of different ways. Or the bursaries that we give go to people who are kind of middle class presenting but low income, a bit like you were talking about. And that is, you know, I struggle with feeling that it's just as appropriate for a family like mine, basically, on a low income to get support as it is a family, you know, of refugees who are now living in temporary accommodation to get support. Like, it's very easy to look at those two kind of very extreme examples and think like, well, my family doesn't deserve support, but actually, you know, if you can't afford it, you do deserve support.
It's even more accessible to a family from a more privileged educational background, at least, because you know how to apply for things.
Exactly, and they can understand the form, and they know how to present their figures. And,
So often the people with the most access are middle class people who temporarily have like a lower income.
Yeah.
Which is really fucked up.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things that I think is really problematic. But I think it's also important for us not to just like dismiss them as like, well, you're fine. Because, you know, we're talking about children, like they can't control how their parents choose to earn money.
But it's also the people who you're getting through the door for Suzuki, who would tend to be people who are educated and have time and don't have that much of a like hand to mouth financial needs. Like those are the people who are going to come and ask for the bursaries. So and I think that's one of the things about the Suzuki world, which so far it's still very much the case that people say, well, you know, word of mouth means that I've never had to like actually do any marketing or advertising to get my studio full. I just get people, you know, through the BSMA or through the friends of my students, and then you end up with a really monocultural group of people because you've just taken Natasha, and then you've taken Natasha's friend Stella, and then you've taken Stella's friend Edie, and suddenly you've got a bunch of upper middle class white kids in your studio, not because you designed it like that, but that's the people, like you were saying, who are attracted to Suzuki. Those are the people whose families expect them to do an instrument. Those are the people whose families have the setup and the support to help a child practice every day, that aren't daunted by breaking a violin, you know, that like all of this stuff that is like under kind of currents. It's not to do with their actual income at that moment, but it's to do with a whole variety of aspirational and cultural expectations. And that's why I think we as Suzuki Hub have been much more successful at that, at actually diversifying our community, is because we are working on a scale where we don't just take whoever walks in the door. We're actively out there all the time marketing and, you know, talking to people about how they can come and make this something for them, and not just taking, you know, the kids' friends who come in the door. Because if you've only got 25 spots in your studio, it's very, very easy to fill it up. And then what are you going to do? You're going to be like, look at it and go, oh, I haven't, you know, got the range that I wanted to. Who shall I ditch in order to get, you know, a different kind of family in there instead? Like, that also is, for most people, unreasonable to expect. And the Suzuki thing is like any, you know, it's for everyone. So you do, you know, we should be saying yes to everyone. So whoever comes,
Well, I think that we should be taking it to everyone, not just saying yes to everyone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The default is that's fine.
But you know, it also is very challenging if you come from a background of never having played an instrument, never having that kind of approach of this is what you've decided to do, so you'll stick with it. If you come from a background of not, you know, if your kids basically kind of, and this is lots of white upper middle class families as well, it's not by any means that these are the families who don't fit that description, but you know, whose kids kind of lead the way, and then if they decide that they've changed their mind, they just, okay, that's fine darling, you don't have to go to art class anymore because you've done it for 7 weeks and then you decided you don't want to do it anymore. Like, you know, all of those things about the demands of Suzuki within the home, if you don't have the kind of family set up, the kind of support from your partner, the kind of financial support, all of these things, like there are many more barriers to lots of lower income families than there are, and historically lower income families also, like not necessarily people, a bit like we were saying about the families who might be on 25,000 income but have a house and grew up middle class, know how to navigate the system, all of those things. The inverse is also true. You can have a family, you can have a second generation immigrant family who are now earning 150,000 between them, but they haven't been brought up with that idea that every child learns an instrument maybe, or they haven't been brought up with the idea that you know, commit to something long term. Like all of these things can exist on the flip side as well. And so I think that's one of the reasons that when you look at classical music particularly, it's an extremely white world, and people like Chi-Chi doing Chi-Chi Nwanoku doing Chineke and Chineke Juniors has made a massive impact, but that is quite sad in itself as well that 2 orchestras has made such an impact. Like that's in a country of 65 million people. It should be, you know, there should be way more than that to try to kind of make a splash. But you know, you're not only dealing with the fact that if you think about the Venn diagram of income and ethnicity, that you know, black and brown families are more likely to have lower incomes than white families are. You're also talking about the expectations that those families may have and how the kind of cultural expectations line up with what is essentially an extremely upper and middle class like hobby going back hundreds of years. You know, like you look at Bronte and all the kids are there like playing the piano, and you know, those are not people of colour, and you know, like, you know, it's a very, very, we're dealing with a huge cultural backlog as well as the individual accessibility in terms of cash.
My family still don't get it.
Playing
I've been playing violin for decades, they still don't get it. And the conversations that you have with those family members, or the potential for grandparents to stump up money for violin lessons or an instrument that might be in the attic. So I didn't have access to any of that. And if it wasn't for the way that I started learning, I wouldn't be able to do it at all. But the conversations that people have with the wider community are still quite negative. And that still surprises me even now. I'll get the odd comment said to me, I'm like,
What kind of thing?
oh, why do I play dead white people's music? Old dead white people's music. I mean,
You know, like fair enough, yeah. I mean, and that's one of the things that we're trying to change, right?
Yeah. Or I get asked if the instrument I'm carrying is mine.
Wow.
So I obviously look like a nanny. So
Which is also hilarious because if you look at the top level of musicians, none of them own their own instruments.
no,
Like Hilary Hahn isn't playing her own Stradivarius.
yeah.
Unique Jackson isn't playing her own instrument. Like they are all borrowing instruments from other people.
Yeah.
And yet it's like, that's not yours, I bet it's not yours. You're the type of person to own it.
Yeah.
You know, like.
But it's people from my community saying that to me.
But that's what I mean. Like,
Yeah. But having, you can ask a question.
Do you think there might be like something around it that if you come from less privilege, that your family wants and hopes you to do something that's going to be more financially secure than becoming a musician?
There's a kind of fight of alliances, I guess, between having enough money to be able to afford an affluent lifestyle versus being accused of thinking you're above everybody else, versus also justifying that use of money in that purpose. So if you've got that money, you get to the point of having that money, it's like, I'm not going to spend it on violin lessons, I'll spend it somewhere else. So there's quite a few things happening, but it is changing, and as people of colour and people of non-white middle class backgrounds become more visible, people see it as permissible in a sense, that actually if that person's doing it, it's kind of alright. Like I've got a couple of friends, one friend who's Bengali, and traditionally if you're Muslim you don't play music, you know.
And that's still a massive barrier, especially where we are. Like Tower Hamlets is over there, it is stashed full of Bengali families, and we have 2 Asian families in the hub.
Yeah. But he's amazing. Plays violin, viola, piano, sings like amazing. But I know he's the one exception I know.
Yeah.
There's one other Asian person I know, I think she's Hindi. But there's even fewer representation in that community than there is in the black community.
And that comes down again even more to like those Venn diagrams of where the overlap between your cultural expectations and your financial situation comes, because as more Asian families get more affluent, many of them are taking the approach of like, you go to private school, you will learn an instrument, you will do your homework, you will play tennis on Saturday, blah blah blah, and sort of, trying to give them a well-rounded education. But if you are in a council flat worrying about money every single day, maybe one of the parents is driving a cab, maybe the other is working as a school assistant or a TA or something, then not only do you feel that you can't afford it, but you'll also feel like there is no one who represents this community who is doing that. Those are for the people whose children have become doctors and lawyers and have the money to live that other lifestyle. So I think it's really complicated. And then I'll just put it out there, but I don't think we should talk about it now. Look at how expensive it is to eat and drink out, how expensive it is to buy cigarettes, especially straights, not rolled, how expensive it is to go to football, how expensive it is to drive a car. There are many things that low-income families still choose to do that we could say, we shouldn't worry about it then, because if they just smoked 1 pack of cigarettes less a week, like a pack of cigarettes costs basically £15, you could pay for your kid to do Suzuki if you spoke 2 packs of cigarettes a week. Like that's pretty much full price Suzuki.
Yeah, but it's addiction, isn't it?
It's addiction, it's cultural expectation, it's poverty of aspiration is one of those phrases that people use. Like, it's that you don't want your child to be the only brown child in a class of upper middle class white kids. And all of those things are really tricky to unpick, and and I think again, if you're working as a self-employed individual, it's really difficult to feel like you make a change in those areas, because you're only going to have 12 kids in your group class. So, it's likely that if you do have any racial diversity within that class, that it is 1, maybe 2 people. Whereas when you look at an organisation like, look at that dog. If you look at an organisation like Suzuki Hub, we've got 180 students. So each child may be the one in their class. It's unlikely, but there may be, some of our groups probably have 1 child of colour in it, but they know that they're part of a bigger organisation, and when they go to the group, they're not going to then be the only one out of 180. And I think that's what makes a difference, partly. I mean, all of these things make a difference, but I think it is,
you come to an open day and you see there's an amazing black teacher, and there are other there's a student who can play minuet too, like 7 black, awesome. And even down to our parent education courses, I've been very careful to choose the videos that represent the Suzuki Hub ethnic diversity, not just, where are my students, I'll just get them. I've worked hard to make sure I represent all 4 of the instruments, and and the ethnicities that we have, and the ages, and the genders, and all of that, everything, it's a big kind of puzzle that you have to take into account. And then in some senses you can't win, because some people would watch that and say it's so tokenistic, you've got the brown kid there, and then the black kid there, and then the white kid there, and then the boy there, and then the da-da-da-da. You can't win. You can't please all of the people all of the time. Well, I think that's also, it's constant work.
Absolutely, it's like she was saying on the video.
Yeah, it's not like you tick all the boxes and it's done. It's okay, now how do we continue to create this environment as the kid changes,
Absolutely.
so that they are inspired by things that can relate to their home life or whatever.
Yeah, but it does also get easier if you do have a successfully diverse studio on whatever scale you do, then it is easier to keep it diverse because you don't have that initial, like, you know, I mean, you and I know both know this feeling. You walk into the room and you're like, I'm the only queer in here, I'm the only black person in here. Like that feeling, whether it's for the parent or whether the child actually is aware of it, that's the thing that's really hard to get over because nobody wants to be that person. And so then you kind of get to the stage where like you have a tipping point, and once it's clear that you're walking into a diverse group, then everyone feels comfortable. Even if they are the only queer parent there, even if they are the only black child there, the fact that there's like visible diversity amongst all the different types of people that there are makes it clear that it's a place that celebrates difference, not excludes you. Yeah. And the Suzuki philosophy is an amazing way to, an amazing start for that. You know, I had this really lovely woman, Deborah, who it never worked out for her to come here, but we do an hour and a half on Zoom one night. We talk about all of the Dr. Suzuki's philosophy and also the social justice aspect and how Suzuki Hub is kind of taking that more than most places as part of what we do. And then the second night, before we do like the practicalities of how much it costs, how you know, how often you have to come here, how do you fit practice into your routine, etc. We do a little round up of like, what is it that has been in your head since yesterday? Like, what are the things that you've been thinking about, worried about, questions, excited about, inspired by, whatever. And she just said, like, I'm so used to coming on, and it was in the middle of lockdown. She was like, I'm so used to logging on to a Zoom call and being the only black face on the screen. And I just want to say, I've just been so excited to be part of this organisation, because even though I am the only black person on this screen, I can just tell that this is a place where I'm going to feel comfortable. And that was like so lovely, because she was in exactly the same situation that she, you know, sometimes resents or worries about or just feels uncomfortable or sad about. But she was saying, you know, basically what I have said about the organisation makes it clear that that's not how I would feel all the time. So I think the philosophy can really help us emphasise the inclusion aspect. Any questions so far? Or other thoughts?
I guess it's a decision you have to make at the beginning.
Yeah, I think it is.
to
If you make it
simple.
strategically, it's much easier to do the thing that you want to do than if you look back and go,
Finish it all.
I think there's also quite a stigma about being on, like, asking for bursaries, potentially. When I was rethinking the baby class, it's like, do I want it to be, like, do I want it to be like, everyone has to discuss how much they're going to pay, or this is the cost and then anyone can ask to have a reduced cost. And I went for the second option because it was easier. But yeah, I think it is a problem to like ask people to ask. Basically.
There is. That's why I think a sliding scale is so great. Is because you just say it to everyone. Like, this is what it costs you, and they just pay whichever one they're on, rather than it being like full price, but we can help. And like maybe in another 10 years, who knows, Suzuki Hub will all be on a sliding scale. I've got no idea, but I think definitely there is that, and I think also it's very difficult. There is a Suzuki teacher I know who does sliding scale, and she's really hardcore in lots of ways, and she insists on everyone telling her their income, even if they're in the top bracket. And when questioned about this, she will say, well, I want you to have the same experience as the low-income families do when they ask for help with paying, which as an ideological idea I can kind of get with, but I know that she just gets loads of shit for it, because, you know, people are like, I'm not going to tell you that I earn 375,000. Like, I'm just going to tell you, yes, I'll pay the top rate. Like, you can't actually equalise what it is to be rich and poor. Like, I think that's a kind of misguided. Like, I can see the idea behind it, but I think it's quite misguided to think that you can it's somehow like shaming the top level earners, because it's like, well, I'm gonna make you feel as uncomfortable as the low income people do when they want to find out about help. And it's like, but they're not asking for help, they're asking for Suzuki lessons. And I know that she's had some very intense conversations with people about.
Now I'm going to charge you £2,000 for 1 hour.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that it's not like a percentage, but I know that she has a sliding scale, and the top is really high. But I also know that she hardly has anyone paying the top rate. And perhaps, I've got no idea about this, but perhaps that is partly about how she goes about presenting that, rather than that there's nobody in her area who wants to pay that.
Interesting though.
Very interesting.
Interesting.
Yes. So we're going to wrap up quite quickly. I was just going to do a very basic, like, lots of people just feel very panicky about how to refer to anyone who's not the same colour as them. So I don't think I need to do a do not use list.
You could do.
Well, we don't use coloured, even though people of colour is fine. It's a kind of weird shift, you know, sociologically. These things,
Is that also true in the US?
Yeah.
that they don't use coloured, yeah, and they do use. And the things that you might see that you don't understand what they mean. BIPOC is a North American thing, and it means Black, Indigenous, people of colour. So any of those groups would be BIPOC. There's a move here to start calling people BPOC, so Black people of colour, because obviously we don't have a Black Indigenous population.
Can you say POC?
You could.
Was that
I think people tend to use people of colour instead, whereas BPOC is just sort of. There's BAME, which is Black and Minority Ethnic, which is basically anyone who's not white, and also white people who are Jewish or from certain communities in Eastern Europe who are not considered to be white, well, who are ethnically white but minority ethnic groups. I think that's falling slightly out of fashion.
because of the word minority?
Partly, yeah. I mean, I try and use minoritised groups because I think that removes it from, like, well, personally for me, but from the group of people that you're talking about. Like, if you are a minoritised group, if someone else saying, "Oh, look at you, you're a minority," even if you are a minority of people, like my feeling about it is, you know, if every minority considered themselves to be part of a group that was all of us together, then we would be the massive global majority, which is why there's that group called global majority. But to say I'm a minority, you're a minority, whatever, I don't like it, and I think that is partly why BAME has gone sort of away a bit. Lots of people use black and brown. Lots of people use black. Politically speaking, there is a big movement of people who feel that anyone who's not white is black. But if you refer to someone who is, for example, from Pakistan as black, it's quite a nuanced, like you would have to talk to that person and ask them, do you identify as black, before you would be able to say, as my black friend here says. Like, so, you know, black and brown just kind of removes that need
What about
for
mixed race?
yeah, mixed race, mixed heritage. Some people, you know, there are always people who are not going to like whatever name you use. Like, there are some people who don't like people of colour, there are other people who don't like the word black, there are people who, you know, don't like black and brown. You, like I said, you can't please all of the people all of the time, and it's constantly changing, so you need to like make sure that you just check, you know. My mum was being perfectly reasonable in the 70s when she used to call Maureen her, now what we would call a black friend, a coloured friend. But now, obviously, we wouldn't say that. And if you said that to some, you know, like we've all heard the horror grandparent stories, and they're like, I'm just saying what I was taught. And it's like, yeah, but it changes. Like, you can't just stick with what. So this conversation in 5 years' time probably be completely obsolete, and in 10 years' time probably be offensive. That's just what happens. You know, queer used to be a word that you could never say unless you were queer. Like, you could not refer to anybody else. You'd have to say, you know, LGBT or whatever. And now it's like very much a shorthand that, you know, if you say, oh, my friend Kate, she's queer, no one's going to be like, that's really rude. Whereas 15 years ago, they definitely would have been like, really? So, you know, it's always changing.
Can I just say that also, I was told by a black person from the States, it's not Afro-American, it's African-American.
Yeah.
Afro's a hairstyle. it's this.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. I got told. So.
And Afro-Caribbean, I think within the UK is still acceptable.
African-Caribbean.
I think a lot of people are still using it, but again, it's old-fashioned. And yeah, and lots of people, you know, if you're 5th generation Black British, you may never ever have been to Africa or the Caribbean, and you might not feel any kind of, you know, it's just
the heritage thing might not feel right then.
Yeah.
And there have been Black families here for 600-700 years.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily a recent thing.
Absolutely. So I think the main thing is to ask people, like if you're not sure,
I think
how would
it's
you
a
like to
shame
be referred to?
that, like, even though we've had the conversation, I still feel awkward saying black because I don't call my white friends white.
Yeah.
So I still, like, such a shame that it's hard to find a place where it just feels like definitely
And I think that
comfortable.
is something that you can practice. Like I was going to say, like you were talking about being Black Joe, well that's fine, but you have to call White Joe then. And I think there is just like, there is a sense that particularly for Brits, they just don't want to talk about it because then they might offend someone. And it's like, but also not talking about it will offend people. Like not talking about it is not the solution. And practicing saying things like, you know, if someone says like, oh, can you describe them to me? Practicing saying, he's a white guy, he's got brown hair, 6'2", brown eyes, in the same way as you would say, she's a black woman, she's got blue hair, about my height, wears glasses. Like to normalise the language of description without any kind of attachment to it, I think is something we can all practice in our everyday lives. And you know, and I think, yeah, just to think about, like inherent bias is another video that I can send the link around to, but you know, just check yourself. Are you, if you walk past a group of black kids, are you putting your phone in your pocket and like, you know, kind of walking a bit more fast? And is that because you've been conditioned by society to think that they might mug you? Well, yeah, so what can you do about that? You can walk past and say hi. And, you know, and if you see a white guy walking towards you and you don't feel maybe you should put your phone away, then it's the same impulse the other way around. And, you know, there's like, obviously, hours and hours and hours of stuff you can watch about this on the internet and elsewhere, and very high level intellectual academic research. But I think for us, like just trying to check our instinctive responses, especially within a class, like make sure that you are not telling the black boys off for being just as rowdy as the white boys, but you know, like just like be self-aware basically.
Please don't say you don't see colour.
Oh yes, definitely that was something. It's so obviously stupid.
Yeah.
It's so obviously
it's fine
stupid.
to see it. It's okay. Look at my face. It's it. I know you can't identify colours.
Just look at red.
Yeah, are you?
Look at my face. It's there.
The only people who can say they don't see colour are people who are 100% blind.
Right?
Like I had this conversation with Habitat, who's registered blind but has some sight, and she's like, I mean, even I can see colour. So what are these people talking about? I've got a certificate saying I'm blind. Yeah, it's a very stupid thing to say. Okay, I think that's everything I wanted to say. Anything else anyone wants to ask, say? No, I will put the links to the other videos that I think are particularly useful on the YouTube description. So if you're interested in doing more, you can watch that. And if you're not, you don't have to. Thanks. Thank you. Oh, I did want to say something about being allies. Just Google allies, anyone who wants to know what I was going to say. Be an ally.